Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives in the world's leading global brands. Today, we're joined by Jessica Troller, who's the HR Director for Microsoft. Welcome to the show. How are you, Jessica?
Hi, Chris. How are you? Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thanks for joining us. Where are you joining us from, shall I say? The first question.
I'm joining you from Seattle in the West Coast here in the US, so it's very early in the morning.
Oh, thank you for getting. What time is it?
Yeah, so it's 7 a.m. Not that early,
Okay.
probably. Yes,
Well,
yes.
that's pretty early to jump on a LinkedIn live show. So I appreciate you jumping on and joining us. How are things? First and foremost, how are you? How have you been keeping?
I am very well, thank you. Yes, it's been like very interesting times, of course, now for everyone, especially the last 5 to 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting, especially I was here in a new city, right? A new company, not for long.
Yeah.
So it's been very interesting. It's been good overall, right? And I think now we're getting to the rhythm of it, right? Understanding that this is here to stay. At the beginning, we thought like, okay, this is going to be a very temporary situation, and now we know we need to learn to live with it.
Is it the same with most sort of tech companies? Like you're just going you're off for the rest of the year, going back in next year?
Correct. That's the plan. Yes. And we are still figuring out the details now, like everyone else, because there are so many things that are still uncertain. But for the rest of the year, correct. Some other countries, of course, the offices are open, but not here in the US.
Yeah. And I'm sure even state by state is completely different from what we see on our side.
Correct. Exactly. So that's another implication to consider, right? California is very different. Like, for example, New York, and when you consider Florida, that now cases are going up at an increased rate. So it's very interesting also, and it requires a lot of consideration.
Well, look, let's focus on more positive things.
Of course, yes. Always be an optimist.
Yeah, always.
Yes.
But tell everyone a bit more about yourself and sort of your journey to this new role that you've now moved, halfway across the US to as well. Tell us a bit more.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm originally from Argentina. That's where I grew up in Buenos Aires. And I started my career 25 years ago at Burger King. I was not in HR. It was a role in operations, running restaurant operations. But that was really a defining moment. And that's why I pursued a career in HR. I had the opportunity to really see live the impact, right, of having the right team, the right environment, the right skills, and the direct correlation with business results. And then it also taught me how to run a business end to end, which is a learning that I took for all of my other roles. And that's how I decided to pursue a career back then when HR was just beginning, right? Like people would be, what? You're studying HR? What is that? Yeah. So after that, I moved to different industries, different companies, which that has been fun as well. So I moved to Walt Disney, spent some time there, then to Amadeus, which is technology for travel and tourism. And that's how I came to the US. So I spent 4 years in Argentina, and after that, I transferred to the US. I spent the last 15 years in Miami mostly, and sometime in New York. After Amadeus, I moved on to Discovery Networks, again, back to media, which I find to be a very interesting, fun environment as well. I spent 5 years there. I moved on to MasterCard, which is payments. And now, since a year ago, I'm here in Seattle. So on the other side, on the West Coast this time, right? And I'm part of Microsoft, and I'm part of Azure, which is our cloud business.
Yeah. Wow. That was a lot.
I know, right?
You've been on an amazing journey so far. How was the transition from to the US? How was that?
It was great. Like, to be honest, it wasn't something that I had like specifically planned. Meaning Argentina is a country where usually people are very specific about getting experiences abroad, right? Especially like back then. Now it's more common like globally, right? Now we're a global community, but back then the opportunity appeared really, and I was like, okay, I can do this for 2 years, 3 years, and then come back. But it really has been a wonderful experience, right? From a cultural perspective, understanding different ways of working, really from a market dynamics, the perspectives of different cultures, right? And being so different from Latin America, right? For us coming from Latin America, it's always looking at the US and what you can learn. So it's been like very interesting and lots of learnings for sure. And it's different, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
even being in Miami, which it's a very multicultural place, very close to Latin America, still it's a change now, but it's been great.
Well, it must have been good. You've been here for what, 20 years now plus?
I know it's been like 15 years, right? So right now it's like, yes, I'm here. Before it was like, okay, next year, but now I'm here.
Moving on to where we are now, what was it that attracted you about the Microsoft role? How did that come to life?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I always wanted to be in technology, in a core technology company. Now, we could say nowadays which company is not a technology company, right? But I was very interested by being in a technology company. I was interested by the scale and the size of the company, the opportunities, and I also was inspired by the cultural transformation the company has been through in the past years. So I was very focused, and I've had conversations throughout the past years until the right role appeared. So that was very intriguing for me and very interesting, especially now having the opportunity to be in Azure, which is the cloud business and one of the key parts of the business.
Yeah, a super exciting part of the business, right?
I know,
And it's
yes.
just constantly growing. What was the requirements of the role when you first came in? What was the big ask? Was it building? Did you build this function from scratch, or did it already have a team in place? What did it look like?
So it's interesting. One of the things that I really like about Microsoft, that in terms of experiences and in terms of requirements, right? Like we're very like flexible, and this you can see this growth mindset in action when we are recruiting, right? I'd say that for this particular role, something that was very important is that there was a new leader in place, bringing different teams together. So
Mm-hmm.
that was one of the key aspects and the first things to get into us taking this role.
Yeah, well, that leads us quite nicely onto the topic
Correct, exactly.
of today's show. So, uh, obviously, going through this journey of bringing those different teams, describe what you mean by different teams, by the way, because obviously, based on our conversation, I know what you're referring to. But for everyone listening, there was different sets of teams in the organization with different skill sets, different cultures, almost internally. Can you explain a bit more about that first?
Totally, of course. So I'd say even beyond Microsoft, what I'd say during the past 15 years, the majority of the time I've been in the US, a constant kind of factor has been in all my roles, bringing teams together and bringing new leaders. Whether it's a new leader that's coming into the organization, whether it's a leader that's getting a new role. And as part of that, it's that leader bringing different teams together, either through mergers, acquisitions, or because we're bringing different business units, very different in nature, to conform a new business group, right? So that's what I've focused the majority of my experience. No, so it's interesting when you look at some of the metrics and some of the studies. No, the success ratio. It's not really high, and it's not that leaders are not successful or the teams are not successful. It usually takes longer than the company is expecting, or if not, the success is less than expected. There are lots of expectations in the leaders, and then if you are not thoughtful and intentional in the approach of bringing the new leader into the organization, to your point, being very mindful of the cultures of the team that you're building, how you're building that team together, then you don't get to deliver the results and create the right environment for the team to be successful, you know? And now in this current environment, of course, that adds an additional layer of deep complexity, right? Bringing teams like not only virtually, because in multinational companies, you're used to usually work remote, but this is fully virtual. No, we're working with new leaders now and teams that haven't met, and we don't know when they are going to be able to meet even once. So that adds another consideration where I find that the intentionality, the communications piece, it's very critical, no? Getting the team connecting and developing kind of the ways of working.
Yeah. Typically, what are the biggest challenges then?
You know, I think it's interesting. Usually the focus when you deal with this type of approach, when you're bringing a new leader, forming these new teams, you're thinking about org design, team effectiveness, leadership effectiveness, new ways of working and operating models. No, I think some of the challenges is, for example, when the leader is already in the organization, sometimes it wouldn't take the necessary time to learn about this new team, about the right challenges, right? Because he or she has been already in the organization, which makes sense. But sometimes that drives to solve not the right problems, right? Or we're solving problems that are not really there and not really understanding what are the problems. That's one of the challenges. Then when you're building new teams, I think it's important to really define a mission. And sometimes we take that for granted because it's, of course, we know what the business is supposed to do.
Kind of
But really,
assume, yeah.
exactly. But really not spending the time in designing that, being very intentional again, being very specific. What does it mean? What role each of the members in a team play onto that, and how, to your point, that fits into the broader scope, right? We have like these subcultures that are coming together that are part of a broader culture. So not taking the time to understand that in a thorough way. And it's interesting, I find also timing, it's one of the challenges where you have to be very, very deliberate, in the sense that it either you can be too quick to act because leaders want to deliver results, to engage the teams, which makes sense. But then if you don't act quick enough, and then if you take more time than needed, then you are not going to be successful, and then you lose some momentum. But you can be too quick also to act as well. So finding the right balance, I think it's a challenge, right? And it's not like a one way to approach it. You need to bring all these aspects together and understand what's happening in the organization. Where are the teams coming from? In many cases, bringing these teams together meant bringing teams that were also in process of being formed. So they weren't fully formed teams. We're already like changing them again, changing the charters, their mission, vision. So it's a constant process as well of change management.
Yeah. What are some of the things you've done in your previous roles then to help leaders do this better? Was it particular training you've done or one-on-ones? What have you found to be the best approach?
Definitely. So I think there are a couple of things now when working with the leaders. So helping them in the learning process, in having a plan, right? Like from a learning perspective, learning about the business, learning about the people, defining specific learning systems, and in a very methodic way, right? To really do that and with a defined timing. Right, and very specific. So helping them create a very specific set of questions for them to gather the right information. The other piece as well is creating a very solid communications plan from very early on, right, and being constantly adapting. Really also then it's about like what's the unique value that they are going to bring to the role, right, and define their leadership perspective and their leadership values, right, and what they are about. So really being very deliberate in the team getting to know the leader, and the leader getting to know the team through either leadership integration activities, right? Of course, this is an ongoing process,
Sure.
but I feel there are some elements that you have to design in a very thoughtful way, like a leadership integration that shortens the time. What we're trying to do is really shorten the time. It's important for the leader to build trust and credibility. And, that takes time, but also there are ways to shorten that time. There are ways, right, like to really generate those points of contacts, building trust and credibility. I think it's very, very important. So I think it's a combination of designing that constant communication. Again, I highlight it's very important. And then it's interesting when you're building the team, right? Like it's building the team and how you make the team work together. So for the leader to spend time in ensuring how the team is working together. Sometimes we think like, okay, we hired all the team or the leadership team, then okay, we're done, right?
Yeah,
and it's really
that's not the
spending
case.
time on that. Exactly, because that's really what's going to drive for me the success when you're stitching a team together that's working, right? Like fully integrating and defining, right? Sometimes we have these, I find, kind of naive idea about like teams working together. I think there are some points of contacts that they need to have, but then there are some ways that each business leader needs to go on their own, work on their business, but defining the right point of contacts, I think it's very important.
That's quite interesting as well, because when we last spoke, you mentioned that you built a brand new leadership team almost during COVID and brought on board some key leaders, right, within the division. How did that work then? Was that the first time you've ever done it like that, where you've obviously had to bring on these very senior leaders into the business remote? How do you then connect them with their teams and kind of do what you've just explained, but virtual? How was that?
Yes. That's, to your point, that's the first time, right, that's fully virtual, where leaders have met everyone virtually and then integrating into their team. So I have to say we were very curious as well, but also we were very, again, like specific in building a whole network of support, like these activities that we are describing, like in a very methodic way. It's harder when everyone is like, right, like from a
Of
remote
course.
perspective and virtually. So you have to ensure that you have like continuity. Continuity is essential, right? Because if you do one thing here or there, but if you don't continue with certain ways, then you don't generate that stickiness of the team. You have to do a bit more, I find, in terms of communication and again, generating points of contact for the leader, because you're losing the spontaneity, right, of the day to day and stopping by someone's office. But I have to say, I'm like, it's been interesting. It's worked like very well, I'd say. Right, like
Yeah,
taking these considerations, yes, but it's work, and we don't have also all the answers. It's
of
many
course.
times a tried approach, right, and we need to like pivot and change. So we've been very in tune of listening to feedback from the employees, what's working, what's not, gathering best practices, right? We don't have all the answers, so really involving everyone in creating this environment.
Yeah, must be quite tough on the leaders themselves, right? Being thrown in, to a brand new leadership role, getting to know a team that you've never met before, especially during the pandemic as well, adds a whole new level of complexity to
Totally,
it.
totally. Yes, yes. It's been interesting having those conversations with the leader. And that goes back to creating the right level of support for the leader as well. We're so focused sometimes, and you bring, I think, a great point, on the leader connecting with the team, right? And like setting the right expectations, focusing on results, focusing on the engagement of the team, especially in these times. But also, I think it's equally important to generate the right level of support with the leaders, connecting them in the organization as well. Again, the same challenges that they are facing with the team is they are entering new into an organization, right? And they need to establish the connectivity. So again, building the right support for the leader has been very important with peer groups, networks, different groups in the organization as well.
What are some of the sort of mistakes that you could share that you've made in the past in some of these areas that you've learned from that perhaps everyone can avoid?
Yeah, no, definitely. And there've been many, right? If I think about it. Um, it's interesting because we want to go. And I think sometimes in HR, we're very focused in adding value to the business, no? And by adding value, we want to do things. And when you have a new team, right, that's coming together with new ideas, they want to do things. So there's this energy, right? So I think kind of gauging what's needed and not trying to do everything at once, which I know it sounds simple, but you want to, and then things are working out. So you want to even accelerate, but sometimes you're like really burning the system if you want to do too much. That's one thing that I'd say. Then I'll say that sometimes like this thing about like not taking enough time in a deliberate way for the teams to connect and build trust. Again, we assume, especially when it's even new leaders, but they are coming from the organization, that it's going to be easier, right? Because they've been in the organization, they maybe met before. So, okay, we go with the assumption, or I went with the assumption, there's not such a need to spend time. And there's always, like many priorities. So we are always trying to see what's relevant. But I've seen that the times that we didn't spend enough moments, right, like building and defining leadership principles, ways of working, then it shows somehow, right? And then it
Yeah.
like brings you back, or it sets you in a different way for delivering results.
It takes time. There's no quick way of doing it here in terms
I
of
know.
building those relationships, building trust. It's not overnight. You can't speed that up. Not in my experience, anyway. It
Yes,
has to be
yes.
genuine, has to be thoughtful, and you can't do that quickly as well.
Agree. Yes. And you're like, you have that intent, right, from the organization, from the leader. So, and it's hard then to like help the leader, okay, not rush in certain moments. And yes, we can do that, but we can do later. Maybe we need to do less things, but that are going to have more impact. And it's a question of balance and how do you bring all the elements together.
Given the virtual environment that we're in now, then how are you keeping employees, especially as you're not going back to next year, maybe even longer than that, right? How are you looking at keeping employees motivated and engaged and teams engaged while working remote?
Yes, that's a great question, Chris. And it's a conversation that we're having with the team. It's very interesting because we're having this debate. What is the right amount of things to do, in the sense of how do you keep the team engaged, but how you don't overload teams.
Overdo
No,
it, like the meetings for the sake of meetings, and
exactly, and check-ins and social activities and virtual activities. No, especially as we are seeing through the different listening systems that people are understandably so overwhelmed, no, with everything that's happening in their personal lives, at work, right? So we were actually having these discussions. Like we've done things, I think at the beginning, no, there was a lot of like spirit for doing all these virtual like connections, right? Which turned out like very well. Now there's a little bit of like fatigue for
yeah,
that.
I
So
agree.
so I think the most important thing and part of the discussion is there are many different things that we can do. And I don't think we've done anything different than other companies. We're trying to learn from other teams in the organization, from within ourselves, because the smaller teams are implementing their own initiatives. So we're trying to see what works, what doesn't. For me, what's very important and what we've been discussing is whatever we do, we need to be consistent with it. And the managers need to create the environment, right? So if we say, okay, we're having days with no meetings, for example, at certain times during the day for people, so people can work more flexible or can do other things. If then the managers don't model that behavior, it's not going to be effective, anything that we do, if the managers are not creating the right environment and allowing the employees directly or indirectly to do that, right? But I have to say we don't have all the answers yet, and we're trying to figure out. I think right now it's interesting. We're having those discussions about how many things we do and how much is too much, right? Because this is going to be also on the long term. So how do we do this in a consistent way as well, and that it works long term?
I agree. Like in the beginning, myself and the team were doing like 2 check-ins a day, and after like a few weeks, it was just like we didn't have anything to talk about.
Exactly.
We're speaking so much and so often. Where it's like, let's just cut these down. It's almost too. It was like Zoom fatigue on our, or on your side, of course, Microsoft Teams.
Exactly.
Just too many virtual. Like I had to end up started blocking times out because I was just on one video call to the next, and it was great to have those calls where it was nothing to do with work, just sort of social ones where like a little team quiz or like a virtual coffee together. But after a while, you can't just keep doing that every single day, because it just doesn't benefit anyone. Because I could be spending more time with my family, or I could be getting on with that particular piece of work, or I don't need to be in a team every single day. So now we've drastically cut down on what we do. I don't know about everyone else on LinkedIn, but I feel like in the beginning it was like an overload of online. Because
I know, yes.
People, I think that's part of it was people just wanting to stay connected because everyone was apart. So it was, and then the other part was, I think companies wanted to check in if their employees were actually working. And then of course the other half, which is the most important, was just seeing if people are okay, right? For me, just seeing my team and knowing that they're okay and having a conversation, and it was the main part of that, to be honest. But even after a while, they're probably like, Chris, leave me alone. I'm fine. I don't have to speak to you every single day as well. So it is a balance, right? It's going to be interesting.
Yes, it's the right balance. And I think to your point, you want to make sure that employees are okay, but you don't want to overdo it. It's how to create the engagement. Like work, it's a point of social connection for people. And to your point, now we don't have that. But we also need to be mindful, again, that there's a lot happening in employees' lives. So it's how do we support that as well?
In terms of the talent locally, is this shifted your approach to talent, given the fact that we're kind of operating in this new global talent marketplace with a lot of people working from home? Has that changed the focus for you and the team of just competing for talent in Seattle, which obviously is super tough, of course, given the location? Have you kind of broadened your horizons, or is it a bit too early for that?
So I think it's a combination. So we've already were before like very flexible in the approach, right? In the talent approach and in general from a company perspective. And now I think there's more demand now to do that, and that's the only way to do it. And then it helps managers realize like, okay, well, all these roles that maybe you thought you needed here, it works being somewhere else, and you can get great talent as well, right? So I think it accelerated and it help in a way managers, right? Like realize some of the things that when they didn't have the pressure, they weren't so inclined to do so, right? So now, yes.
Yeah, and also everyone's being, all those people that said it couldn't be done now being proven wrong. So
exactly,
there's a lot of people that said this won't work, working remotely. So it's now, yeah. So there's and of course you're perfectly set up from a technology standpoint, right? You couldn't be better prepared. as an
Of
organization.
course. Of course. So that's
To-
another point, right? Like we do products and produce products that are
yeah.
driven to that. So for
Yeah.
sure. Yes.
Are you back on track now with your current projects? Because obviously, many HR leaders that I speak to, obviously, the crisis kind of a lot of the projects got put to one side whilst we dealt with what the crisis. How much are you back? Are you still focusing on crisis management versus back on track with deliverables and everything that you was focused on beforehand?
So I think it's a combination, and to your point, it's like balancing out now a bit more. No, I think what this has also benefit for me, at least, has been like we're being very mindful on the things we're doing and really prioritizing and focusing on the things that really drive the most impact and that are really necessary. No, and to your point, like many things that we didn't think we could do, now we realize, hey, yes, they can be done. And I think as well, it gives the opportunity to reevaluate, okay, all these things that we've been doing, do we need to continue doing so now in this constant environment, or can we do without? Right. So I think that has been another interesting learning. So it's been a balance. I think right now we've found like a good balance. And then things are, I wouldn't say like settling, but like everyone is at a different stage now, understanding, okay, this is now like the new reality, as we call it. No, it's not going to be temporary. We don't know yet how things are going to turn out. So, but I think prioritizing, to recap, really prioritizing on focusing and driving conversations on what is going to drive the right impact have been very important.
Yeah. So, what are the sort of the key focuses then for you and the Azure team then for the next 6 to 12 months?
So I'd say we are still in this process now as we're bringing these new leaders together, of like bringing the team together and
The
making
brand
it
new
a high
leadership team.
performing team.
Yep.
Exactly. No, so that's part of it. Like, and really building, like really designing all these building blocks of a team working together. That's one of the priorities. Is then as well like managing the business. No, like we in HR help run the business. It's a
Business
business.
doesn't stop.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. No, for
That's,
sure.
that's something people have to realize for all of this. So, business hasn't stopped, right? You can't, business has to continue. So, going for all of this as well, and HR, needs to focus back on the business, because at the end of the day, that's what's going to be in the best interest of everyone, the employees moving forward. If the business is doing well, then we can take care of everyone else.
I agree. And then I think it's also in terms of priorities, it's also like helping the managers know, like deal with these new environments in general, right? And pivoting some of the skills. So that's a focus, right? That it's relatively new, that was needed before. But again, right now there's a peak, there's more demand, and we know that we need that on the long term, especially new managers now that haven't dealt with crisis in the past as well.
Yeah. All of these managers, in terms of their teams, what's the main things they're coming to you with? What are the main challenges?
So I'd say it's a combination. No, first and foremost, it's managers want to make sure employees are okay. No, and like how we can ensure and super ensure that employees are okay, and we have like lots of benefits and tools. No, so we're super well structured. And then is this about like prioritizing, right? And what are, and then like managing like teams remotely, and how to manage this flexibility. Now, I think, which at the end comes up, of course, we have like policies and programs and initiatives and guidance, but it's up to the manager, no, and like judgment and really modeling the behaviors, no, and that requires experience going through some situations. So that's a lot where we're helping the managers with.
Yeah, yeah. Again, no one has the playbook, right? So
Totally, yes, we're constantly learning and seeing, and I think that has been like I'd say like a positive out of this. Now there are many, but it's like just really understanding that we're in this together. We're all learning. We don't have the answers, so the importance of connecting and really being flexible and listening to people's perspectives.
I feel like everyone also is forgetting about you and your team, right? How are you getting on through this? Because who's there to support HR? How's it been working through this with your team? I'm sure it hasn't been
Yes.
easy.
No, totally. I mean, I have to say, I'm super proud in the sense that the way the team pivoted, right, and really like quickly reacted to, okay, this is what things are happening. So, okay, let's make sure we are helping the leaders establish ways of connecting with the teams and checking in and taking the pulse of the organization. So, from that perspective, and then to your point, no, a lot of what we do in HR is really holding space for people, for leaders, and that has become increasingly much more important. I do a lot of yoga and meditation, so that helps a lot, right? I have to say, in terms of self reflection, which is so important in terms of pause and really, okay, like as we were saying, right, like an optimistic view and energetics.
Yeah, no, because you can't, because you're in an apartment, right, in Seattle with, I'm not saying you don't have any friends, but obviously a lot of your family and support system are back home. So it must have been quite tough for you to be dealing with this crisis whilst in a new city, relatively, right, for what, a year?
Yeah, I've been here a little bit over a
Where you
year.
are. So I'm sure the mindfulness and yoga have definitely come in handy for
Totally.
for this as well. I'm going to jump into our quick fire round, Jessica.
Okay.
So I didn't warn you about this, but I'm going to throw you in the deep end. So I'm going to ask you 5 questions, and you have no longer than 30 seconds to give us some amazing answers. You
Okay, I'll
ready?
try. I am.
Yeah,
I hope I am.
yeah. What was the number one thing that was holding you back from becoming a senior HR practitioner?
I think probably not owning that I have the right to be at the table, right? And I had the knowledge and the expertise to really provide a point of view.
That imposter syndrome,
I
right?
know. Yes. Yes.
I completely get it. I'm
Yes.
sure everyone listening, if you can if you can relate to Jessica, put a comment in LinkedIn. I bet everyone can relate to that one. What's the best piece of business advice you've ever received?
I have to say, I do take a lot of inspiration from yoga about self reflection and about the power of pause, which has
Mm,
been very useful throughout these times. It's always, but I have to say, that's where I take a lot of inspiration when I'm thinking about business of the
yeah,
learning.
and
Yes.
the fact that you're intentional and you make space for that, super important as well. Yeah,
Totally.
great advice. What's some books you'd recommend to our audience, and why?
There's so many, no, but I'd say the ones that I'm reading right now and
Yeah,
some I
or it doesn't have to be HR related, by the way.
yes. So there's one that I love. That's why I'm rereading, which is Break the Habit of Being Yourself by Dr. Joe Dispenza, which is
Mhm.
about neuroscience and how you can create new habits and all principles from how the brain works, energetics. So I find that very interesting and very applicable to so many things. I also love the books from Michael Bungay Sr. They're
Oh,
so good,
yeah,
right? Like very simple but sophisticated, concise, very
he's so
pragmatic.
good.
Yes.
He was on the show a few weeks ago.
Yes, yes, I
He's
saw
so good.
that.
He's
Yes.
great. Yeah. Well, great. All both great books. So definitely, I'll link them in the description for everyone as well. What about sort of the online resources? Where do you spend your time in terms of networking, in terms of any online learning? Where's your go-to resources for sort of to stay up to date?
Yes, yes. So definitely I say LinkedIn for sure, right? What I've done is trying to be also like very focused and in curating some of the stuff. So I focus on some resources and trying to change that. But mostly it's LinkedIn. And from there you can get amazing resources as well as podcasts. I love podcasts and then you get to learn so much, connect with new people a lot. I've learned like not only learned, but connected with a lot of new people just by listening to podcasts.
My last question: what's one thing about your business now that you're most excited about?
Overall, being in the technology space, it's just so interesting by the multiple opportunities that we have to have like a lot of positive impact in different perspectives. So just that, it's super inspiring.
Yeah, well, that's why you joined in the first place, right?
Exactly. Yes.
So, and it's
Yes.
cloud is such a super exciting space to be in right now, as well. And I think everything that's going on has also accelerated that.
Yes.
The
Yes.
move to cloud is only been dramatically accelerated over the last few months. So it's going to be. I'm sure when we speak in a few months' time, you're probably going to have triple, quadrupled your headcount.
Yes.
But but look, thank you so much for taking the time out, Jessica. It's a real pleasure. I know this is your first ever podcast, so thank you for saying yes. Hopefully it was a good experience.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so very much to you for the invitation. Really enjoyed the conversation and glad we were able to connect.
Yeah, well, hopefully I'll see you soon. We have a lot of our CHRO roundtables that we deliver. We definitely have Seattle on the list, so hopefully we get to come and see you soon. And but until then, stay safe. And yeah, I wish you all the best until we next speak. Okay.
Thank you so much. Likewise, and I hope you have a great weekend ahead.